The click of the camera shutter echoed across the vast Texas landscape as Delilah Norton lowered her prized Eastman Kodak from her eye, the golden sunlight of 1885 spilling across her face. She had traveled over 2,000 miles from Boston to Fort Worth, Texas, with nothing but her camera equipment, a journal filled with ambitious dreams, and an assignment from Harper's Weekly to document the vanishing American frontier before progress claimed it forever. "Damnation," she muttered, examining the glass plate she'd just exposed. The distant mesa she'd been attempting to capture had blurred with the slightest movement of her hands. 6 hours of riding, 3 hours of waiting for perfect light, wasted in a tremor that lasted less than a second. Delilah tucked a wayward strand of auburn hair back into her practical bun and began packing her equipment. The sun was setting, and she'd promised her reluctant host, Mrs. Holloway at the Fort Worth boarding house, that she wouldn't be foolish enough to remain in the wilderness after dark. 3 weeks in Texas had already taught her that the wilderness held as many dangers as it did wonders. As she secured her camera to her horse's saddle, a sound made her freeze hoofbeats approaching rapidly from the west. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she fumbled for the small derringer in her saddlebag. Women traveling alone in these parts were rare, and she'd been warned repeatedly of the dangers. A rider appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the blazing sunset. Man and horse seemed carved from the same weathered stone, moving as one across the landscape. He approached slowly, one hand raised in greeting. "Evening, madam," he called, his voice carrying clearly across the distance. "Might not be the safest time to be out here alone." As he drew closer, Delilah's grip on her derringer loosened slightly. The man appeared to be in his early 30s, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. His clothes were dusty but well kept, and the badge pinned to his leather vest caught the fading sunlight. "I appreciate your concern, sir, but I'm perfectly capable of managing my affairs," she replied, straightening her spine and lifting her chin slightly. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "No doubt about that, madam. But even the most capable folks can find themselves outmatched by Texas nights. Name's Bartholomew Stone. Most folks call me Bart. I'm the deputy sheriff hereabouts." "Delilah Norton," she replied, offering her hand in what she hoped was a professional manner. "I'm a photographer for Harper's Weekly." His calloused hand engulfed hers briefly. "A photographer." His eyes drifted to the camera secured to her saddle. "Don't believe I've ever met a lady photographer before." "Perhaps you haven't been meeting the right ladies, Mr. Stone," Delilah replied, unable to keep a hint of sharpness from her tone. She'd grown weary of such remarks during her 3 years working for the publication. To her surprise, Deputy Stone laughed. "Can't argue with that logic, Miss Norton." He glanced at the darkening sky. "If you're headed back to town, I'd be obliged to ride alongside you. These trails can be tricky after sunset, especially for those not born to them." Delilah hesitated. She'd spent her entire career fighting to be taken seriously, to prove she needed no man's assistance. But the shadows were lengthening, and the wilderness that had seemed so majestically photogenic by day was quickly becoming an alien landscape. "I would welcome the company, deputy," she conceded, mounting her horse with practiced ease. As they rode, Bart Stone kept a respectful distance, but maintained a steady flow of conversation that surprised Delilah with its intelligence and insight. He pointed out landmarks invisible to her eye and shared stories of the land that made her fingers itch for her notebook. "That ridge there," he said, gesturing toward a rocky outcropping. "The Comanche believe it's shaped like a sleeping warrior. There's a whole story behind it about a brave who loved a woman from a rival tribe. When their families forbade their union, they met in secret near that ridge. One night, he was mortally wounded defending her from a mountain lion. The Great Spirit, moved by their devotion, transformed him into stone so he could forever watch over the land she loved. "That's beautiful," Delilah murmured, seeing the formation with new eyes. "Is it true?" Bart shrugged, his smile enigmatic in the gathering dusk. "Truth's a funny thing out here, Miss Norton. Some things are true whether they happened exactly that way or not." By the time they reached the outskirts of Fort Worth, Delilah had filled her mind with more potential images than a dozen photographers could capture in a lifetime. As they approached Mrs. Holloway's boarding house, she found herself reluctant for their journey to end. "Thank you for the escort, Deputy Stone," she said formally as they reached the modest porch. "My pleasure, Miss Norton." He tipped his hat. "If you're planning more excursions to capture our wilderness, I'd be happy to suggest some locations that might interest you. Places most Easterners never get to see." Delilah considered the offer. "I would appreciate that. My assignment is to document the true spirit of the frontier before it disappears entirely." A shadow crossed Bart's face. "Noble goal, that. Though I reckon some aspects of the frontier aren't so easily captured on a glass plate." Before she could ask what he meant, Mrs. Holloway's door swung open, spilling warm lamplight onto the porch. "Miss Norton, I was about to send Mr. Holloway out searching for you." The landlady's eyes darted to Bart. "Evening, Deputy Stone." "Mrs. Holloway," he acknowledged with a respectful nod. "Just ensuring Miss Norton returned safely. She was photographing out near Comanche Ridge." Mrs. Holloway's eyebrows shot up. "All the way out there? Goodness, Miss Norton, you'll give an old woman heart palpitations with such adventures." Delilah smiled apologetically. "The light was perfect today. I couldn't resist." "Well, come in before you catch your death. There's stew left if you're hungry." Mrs. Holloway retreated inside, leaving the door ajar. Delilah turned back to Bart. "About those locations you mentioned, tomorrow if you're free," he suggested. "I could stop by around noon. I know a place that might be just what you're looking for, where the real Texas still lives and breathes." "Tomorrow at noon, then," she agreed, suddenly eager for morning to arrive. As Bart rode away, Delilah found herself standing a moment longer in the cool evening air, watching his silhouette disappear into the gathering darkness. For the first time since arriving in Texas, she felt she might be on the verge of discovering what she'd truly come to find. The next morning dawned clear and bright, with a crispness to the air that promised a perfect day for photography. Delilah spent the early hours in the small darkroom she'd established in a converted storage space at the boarding house, developing the plates from her previous day's work. Despite the disappointment of the blurred mesa, several images showed promise: a lone cottonwood standing sentinel over the prairie, a hawk circling against billowing clouds, the delicate structure of a prickly pear blossom. As noon approached, she carefully packed her equipment, selecting the plates and chemicals she thought would be most useful. She'd learned to travel light but prepared, never knowing when the perfect image might present itself. Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway as Delilah was fastening her leather satchel. "Deputy Stone is waiting in the parlor," she announced, a hint of curiosity in her voice. "Quite unusual for him to escort a lady personally. He must think highly of your work." Delilah felt a flush of pleasure at the words, but kept her expression neutral. "He's merely being courteous to a visitor, Mrs. Holloway. Besides, I suspect few locals share my enthusiasm for tramping about the wilderness in pursuit of images." "Perhaps," the older woman replied, though her knowing smile suggested otherwise. "Though I must say, it's the first time I've seen Bartholomew Stone take an interest in anything besides his duties since he returned from the war." This information gave Delilah pause. The war. But he seemed so young. He was little more than a boy when he went to fight, just 17, came back changed, as they all did, threw himself into keeping the peace around here ever since. Mrs. Holloway sighed. It's good to see him offering to show someone the beauty of this place. He used to love this land with a poet's heart before Petersburg. Before Delilah could ask more, Mrs. Holloway straightened and resumed her usual brisk manner. Best not keep him waiting. I've packed you some bread and cold chicken. The deputy mentioned you might be gone until sunset. Bart was standing by the window when Delilah entered the parlor, his tall frame silhouetted against the sunlight. He turned at her approach, and she was struck again by the intensity of his gray eyes, observant, intelligent, and carrying a depth of experience that belied his years. "Miss Norton," he greeted her, tipping his hat slightly. "Ready for an adventure, always, Deputy Stone," she replied, lifting her camera case. "Where are we headed today?" "Thought we might ride out to Wildflower Canyon," he said, taking the heavier of her cases. "It's about 2 hours' ride, but I promise it's worth every minute. The spring rains have brought out colors that would put a Persian carpet to shame." Outside, Delilah discovered Bart had brought not only his own horse, but a second mount for her, a dappled mare with gentle eyes. "This is Willow," he explained. "My friend Jacob at the livery thought she'd be a better match for you than that skittish gelding you've been renting. She knows this country and won't shy at shadows." Delilah approached the horse cautiously, extending her hand. The mare nuzzled her palm gently. "She's beautiful," Delilah murmured. "But I couldn't possibly." "It's already arranged," Bart said, securing her equipment to Willow's saddle with practiced efficiency. "Jacob owed me a favor, and Willow needs the exercise. She's too smart to be happy standing in a stall all day." The ride to Wildflower Canyon took them through stretches of prairie and woodland that Delilah would never have discovered on her own. Bart seemed to know every trail, every landmark, every shift in the landscape. He spoke of the land with such intimacy and passion that Delilah found herself seeing it through new eyes, not just as picturesque scenery to be captured, but as a living entity with its own rhythms and secrets. "There's beauty in the harshness here," he explained as they paused atop a ridge overlooking a vast expanse of prairie dotted with stands of mesquite. "Eastern folks often come expecting majestic mountains or lush forests, and they miss what's right before them. But if you look closely there, see that patch of ground squirrels. And there, the way the grass moves in waves with the wind. That's a dance that's been going on since before humans ever set foot here." Delilah dismounted, setting up her tripod quickly to capture the scene he'd indicated. Through her viewfinder, she suddenly saw what he meant: the intricate patterns of life playing out across what had initially seemed an empty landscape. "You have an artist's eye, Deputy," she observed as she exposed the plate. "Just the eye of someone who's spent his life here," he demurred. "And please, call me Bart. Deputy sounds so formal when we're out here with just the birds and the wind for company." "Then you must call me Delilah," she replied, feeling a small thrill at the informality. In Boston, such familiarity would have been scandalous without a proper introduction and several chaperoned meetings. But out here, conventional rules seemed as distant as the eastern seaboard. They continued their journey, eventually descending into a hidden canyon that opened up before them like a revelation. True to Bart's word, the canyon floor was carpeted with wildflowers, bluebonnets, Indian paintbrush, evening primrose, and dozens of varieties Delilah couldn't name, creating a tapestry of color that took her breath away. "Oh my," she whispered, dismounting before Bart had fully stopped. She stood transfixed, turning in a slow circle to take in the panorama. "It's like standing inside a rainbow. Bart watched her reaction with quiet satisfaction. Wait until you see the light hit the west wall around 4 o'clock. The limestone turns golden, and with the flowers below, well, I've never seen anything to match it, not even in those fancy European paintings they show in San Antonio. For the next several hours, Delilah worked with focused intensity, moving from one vantage point to another, adjusting her camera for different perspectives. Bart kept a respectful distance, occasionally suggesting an angle or pointing out a particularly striking composition, but mostly content to watch her work. During a brief rest, they shared the lunch Mrs. Holloway had packed, sitting on a sun-warmed boulder above the canyon floor. "How did you discover this place?" Delilah asked, accepting the canteen he offered. A shadow passed across Bart's face. "After the war, I couldn't sleep much. Nightmares. I'd ride out before dawn, just me and the stars, trying to find some peace. Found this canyon one morning as the sun was coming up. Sat here until sunset, just watching the light change, listening to the birds. First day since Gettysburg, I didn't hear cannons in my head." He spoke matter-of-factly, without self-pity, but Delilah felt the weight of his words. She thought of the pristine landscapes she'd been photographing, never considering the blood that had soaked into American soil not 2 decades earlier. "I'm sorry," she said simply. "The war took so much from so many." Bart's eyes met hers, and she saw something in them shift, a recognition, perhaps, that she truly understood. "Yes, it did. But it also taught me to see beauty where I might have missed it before. When you've been through darkness, the light afterward is that much brighter." As the afternoon progressed, they moved to the western edge of the canyon to capture the light Bart had described. He helped her set up her equipment on a narrow ledge that offered the perfect vantage point, their hands occasionally brushing as they worked together to secure the tripod on the uneven ground. "There," he said finally, stepping back. "You should be able to get exactly what you need from here." But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, bathing the canyon in a warm amber glow, Delilah found herself lowering her camera to simply witness the spectacle. The limestone walls turned to molten gold, the flowers below shimmering in the slanting light, and the entire canyon seemed to hold its breath in a moment of perfect harmony. "This is why you brought me here," she said softly. "Not just to photograph it, but to see it, to feel it." Bart stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling evening air. "Some things can't be captured, Delilah, not even by your camera. Some things have to be experienced." When she turned to look at him, his face was illuminated by the same golden light that transformed the canyon, revealing a gentleness she hadn't fully noticed before. For a breathless moment, she thought he might reach for her hand or perhaps even kiss her. Instead, he cleared his throat and gestured toward the darkening sky. "We should start back soon if we're going to reach town before full dark." The ride back to Fort Worth was quieter, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts. As the town came into view, its lamps beginning to twinkle in the dusk, Delilah felt a curious reluctance to return to civilization. The day had held a magic that seemed too fragile to survive the noise and bustle of even a frontier town. At Mrs. Holloway's, Bart helped her unload her equipment. "I hope you got what you needed today," he said, his formal manner returning now that they were back among people. "I got far more than I expected," Delilah replied honestly. "Thank you for showing me a side of Texas I might never have discovered on my own." He nodded, suddenly awkward. "I'm on duty the next 2 days, but after that, if you're interested, there's an old Spanish mission about a day's ride south. The architecture might make for some interesting photographs." "I would like that very much," Delilah said, surprised by how much she meant it. As Bart rode away, Mrs. Holloway appeared in the doorway. "Productive day, Miss Norton?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with unasked questions. "Very," Delilah replied, gathering her precious plates. "If you'll excuse me, I should get these developed while they're fresh." In the solitude of her makeshift darkroom, Delilah worked methodically, but her mind kept returning to the moment on the canyon ledge, the way Bart had looked in the golden light, the unspoken connection she'd felt between them. It was foolish, she told herself sternly. She was here for work, not romance. In 6 weeks, she would return to Boston with her photographs, publish her series on the American frontier, and continue building her reputation as a serious photographic artist. A romance with a Texas deputy had no place in that carefully constructed future. Yet, as the images from Wildflower Canyon emerged from her chemicals, revealing a beauty and depth she had rarely achieved in her work, Delilah couldn't help wondering if perhaps there were other possibilities she hadn't considered, other paths that might lead to unexpected destinations. The next 2 days passed slowly for Delilah, filled with developing photographs, writing notes for her article, and exploring Fort Worth with her camera. She captured images of the cattle pens at the rail yard, weathered cowboys emerging from saloons, and children playing hoops along the dusty Main Street. But none of these subjects engaged her as deeply as the wilderness images, and she found herself counting the hours until Bart would be free to guide her again. On the evening of the second day, as she sat on Mrs. Holloway's porch writing in her journal, the sound of urgent hoofbeats drew her attention. A rider was approaching at speed, and even in the failing light, she recognized Bart's broad-shouldered silhouette. Her heart leapt before she registered the tension in his posture. He dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. "Delilah," he called, taking the porch steps 2 at a time. His face was grim, a smear of blood visible on his sleeve. "What's happened?" she asked, rising to her feet. "Stage robbery about 10 miles east," he said tersely. "Drivers dead, 2 passengers wounded. Sheriffs forming a posse to go after them. I've got to ride out with them right away." His eyes searched hers. "I'm sorry about our plans. I don't know when I'll be back." "Of course," Delilah said, a cold weight settling in her stomach. "Please be careful." He reached out as if to touch her face, then caught himself, his hand falling back to his side. "The bandits were headed south. If you go exploring while I'm gone, stay north of town. Promise me." The intensity of his concern touched her. "I promise." "Bartholomew Stone." Sheriff Hayes' voice boomed from the street. "We're burning daylight." Bart turned to go, then paused, reached into his pocket and pressed a folded paper into her hand. "I was going to give you this tomorrow. It's a map to a place called Painter's Bluff. If I'm not back in 3 days and you get restless." He shrugged, a small smile touching his lips despite the urgency of the moment. "Just stay alert if you go, and take Jacob from the livery with you. He knows the way." Before she could respond, he was gone, swinging back onto his horse and galloping after the sheriff's posse, leaving Delilah clutching the hand-drawn map and fighting an inexplicable sense of foreboding. 3 days stretched into 5 with no word from the posse. Delilah tried to focus on her work, but worry gnawed at her concentration. On the afternoon of the 5th day, unable to bear the confinement of town any longer, she approached Jacob at the livery about visiting Painter's Bluff. The weathered stable master studied her thoughtfully. "Bart showed you his special place, did he? That boy's been going up there to think since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His grandfather used to say the bluff had healing powers. He suggested I might find it photographically interesting," Delilah explained, uncomfortable with the knowing look in Jacob's rheumy eyes. "I expect you will at that," Jacob agreed. "I'd be happy to take you there tomorrow if the weather holds. It's about 4 hours' ride, though, so we'd need to start at first light." That night, Delilah dreamed of Bart standing on a high bluff, silhouetted against a sky alive with stars. He was calling to her, but the wind carried his words away before she could understand them. She woke before dawn, a sense of urgency propelling her through her preparations. Jacob proved to be a taciturn but dependable guide, leading her northward through rolling hills that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. As they rode, Delilah noticed subtle changes in the landscape, the soil becoming rockier, the vegetation more sparse but somehow more vibrant in its determination to survive. "Almost there," Jacob announced as they crested a ridge around midday. "Painter's Bluff is just ahead." They call it that because of the rock paintings' Indian work, hundreds of years old. Bart's been studying them since he was a boy. Knows more about them than anyone, even the professor who came down from Chicago a few years back. They left the horses tethered in a small grove of cottonwoods and climbed the last stretch on foot. The path narrowed, winding between massive boulders until it suddenly opened onto a flat expanse of rock overlooking a breathtaking vista. The bluff extended like a natural balcony, providing an unobstructed view of the surrounding countryside for what seemed like 100 miles in every direction. "I'll leave you to your picture-taking," Jacob said, settling himself in the shade with his back against a boulder. "Give a holler if you need anything." Delilah barely heard him, already entranced by what she was seeing. The landscape spread below her like a vast, living map, rivers winding like silver ribbons through valleys, distant mesas rising from the plains, and the infinite Texas sky arching overhead. But what truly captivated her were the paintings Jacob had mentioned. The rear wall of the bluff was adorned with dozens of ancient images, stylized human figures, animals, celestial symbols, and abstract patterns in faded reds, yellows, and blacks. Some were clearly thousands of years old, while others appeared to have been added over many generations, creating a layered visual history of the people who had stood where she now stood. She set up her camera reverently, determined to document these remarkable artifacts. As she worked, she noticed small markers placed beside some of the images, pieces of paper secured under stones, covered in a neat, precise handwriting she somehow knew was Bart's. Each note identified what the researchers believed the image represented and approximated its age. "He's been documenting them for years," Jacob's voice startled her. He had approached silently while she was absorbed in her work. "Says they tell stories we've forgotten how to hear, stories about how to live in balance with the land." "It's extraordinary," Delilah murmured. "I had no idea such things existed here," Jacob nodded. "Most folks don't. That's why Bart's so careful about who he brings up here. He's afraid if too many people knew, they'd come to gawk or, worse, try to chip off pieces as souvenirs." He fixed her with a penetrating stare. "He must think mighty highly of you to share this place." Before Delilah could respond, a distant movement caught her eye, riders approaching from the south. Jacob followed her gaze, squinting against the sun. "That'll be the posse," he said, relief evident in his voice. "They're back." Delilah's heart thundered in her chest as she counted the distant figures. 6 riders where 7 had departed. "Jacob," she began, her voice tight with anxiety. The old man placed a calming hand on her arm. "Don't borrow trouble, Miss Norton. Could be they split up, or maybe one of the wounded passengers is being brought back separately." But the concern in his eyes belied his reassuring words. They descended the bluff quickly, reached their horses, and rode to meet the returning posse. As they drew closer, Delilah searched desperately for Bart's familiar outline among the riders. Sheriff Hayes saw them approaching and raised a hand in greeting, his expression unreadable beneath his dust-caked beard. "Jacob, Miss Norton," he acknowledged as they met. "Wasn't expecting to find you out here. "We were visiting Painter's Bluff," Jacob explained. "Where's Bart?" A ripple of glances passed between the posse members. The sheriff sighed heavily. "He's alive, but he took a bullet in the shoulder 2 days back. We left him at the Garner place about 10 miles south with their girl looking after him. Didn't want to risk moving him until the bleeding stopped proper." Will he recover?" Delilah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Reckon so. Stone's tough as old leather. But he lost a fair amount of blood, and the doc in town should take a look at that wound. We were just heading back to get a wagon for him." "I'll go," Delilah said immediately, turning her horse southward. "Now hold on, Miss Norton," the sheriff protested. "This ain't exactly a job for a city lady. The Garner place is remote, and I've been riding these trails for weeks, Sheriff," she interrupted, her chin lifting defiantly. "I'm perfectly capable of finding my way, especially with Jacob's help. And I believe I've proven I'm more than just a city lady." The sheriff's weathered face cracked into a reluctant smile. "That you have, miss. Bart said you were a force to be reckoned with." He turned to Jacob. "You know where the Garner homestead is?" Jacob nodded. "Been there many times." "We can be there by sundown if we push." "Then go with my blessing," Hayes conceded. "Tell Bart we got all 3 of the bandits. 2 dead, 1 trussed up tighter than a Christmas turkey in our jail, and the money's been recovered." Delilah barely registered this information, already calculating the fastest route south based on the map she'd memorized. With a quick nod to the sheriff, she and Jacob set off at a brisk trot, saving their horses' strength for the long ride ahead. The Garner homestead was even more isolated than Delilah had imagined, a sturdy log cabin with a small barn and corral nestled in a protected valley. Smoke rose from the stone chimney, and a young woman looked up from the garden at their approach, shading her eyes against the setting sun. "You must be here for the deputy," she called as they dismounted. "Pa said someone would be coming. He's inside, been asking for someone named Delilah since the fever broke this morning." Delilah's heart skipped a beat. "I'm Delilah," she said, hastening toward the cabin door. The interior was dim after the bright sunlight, and it took a moment for her eyes to adjust. When they did, she saw Bart lying on a narrow bed against the far wall, his shoulder heavily bandaged, his face pale but his eyes alert. "Delilah," he breathed, a smile spreading across his face that transformed his drawn features. "You found my bluff." She crossed to him in 3 quick strides, kneeling beside the bed. "I found more than that," she said softly, taking his uninjured hand in hers. "I found you." For a long moment, they simply looked at each other, the connection between them strengthening into something tangible and undeniable. Then Bart winced, shifting position slightly. "Not exactly how I planned to show you the countryside," he joked weakly. "Sheriff Hayes says they caught the bandits," she told him, reluctantly releasing his hand to pour a cup of water from the pitcher beside the bed. "All 3 of them." Bart accepted the water gratefully. "Good. They killed Elliot, the stage driver. He had 4 children." His expression darkened momentarily before he focused on her again. "What did you think of the rock paintings? They're remarkable. I took several photographs, though I don't know if they'll capture the true essence of the place." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for sharing it with me. Jacob said you're very protective of that place." "It's special," Bart said simply. "Sacred to the people who made those paintings and important to preserve. Not many would understand that." His eyes held hers. "But I thought you might." They were interrupted by Jacob and the Garner girl entering with a tray of food. "You 2 can get reacquainted after you've had something to eat," Jacob announced practically. "Tomorrow we need to figure out how to get this stubborn lawman back to town without reopening that wound." The journey back to Fort Worth the following day was slow and careful, with Bart secured in a wagon padded with quilts borrowed from the Garners. Despite his protests that he could ride, the ashen color that came over him whenever the wagon hit a particularly rough patch confirmed the wisdom of this arrangement. Delilah rode alongside, vigilant for any sign of distress. Their conversation flowed easily throughout the journey, Bart sharing stories of growing up in the territory, Delilah describing her struggle to be taken seriously as a female photographer in Boston. "My father wanted me to marry a banker and settle into a respectable life of tea parties and charity committees," she explained. "When I insisted on pursuing photography instead, he gave me 1 year to get it out of my system before I came to my senses." Bart chuckled. "And how long ago was that?" 3 years, Delilah admitted with a smile. "He's since revised his timeline to whenever you're ready to be reasonable. And are you ready to be reasonable, I mean?" She considered the question seriously. "I used to think being reasonable meant eventually conforming to everyone else's expectations. Now I'm not so sure. There's a different kind of reason out here, a more honest one, perhaps." Bart's eyes held hers. "Texas has a way of clarifying things, stripping away what doesn't matter." By the time they reached Fort Worth, word of their arrival had spread. A small crowd had gathered, including Dr. Wilson, who immediately took charge of Bart's care. Despite Delilah's desire to stay with him, she was firmly shooed away once they reached his small house on the edge of town. "He needs rest and medical attention, not pretty eyes distracting him," the doctor told her bluntly. "Come back tomorrow." Reluctantly, she returned to Mrs. Holloway's, where she was met with a barrage of questions about the deputy's condition and their dramatic journey. The landlady's eyes gleamed with romantic speculation, but Delilah maintained a careful composure, sharing only the practical details of Bart's injury and recovery. In the privacy of her room, however, she allowed herself to examine the emotions that had been building since that moment in Wildflower Canyon. There was something between them, something that had grown with each shared experience, each conversation, each silent understanding. Something that both thrilled and terrified her. Her assignment would end in less than a month. She had commitments in Boston, her career, her hard-won position at the publication, her family despite their differences, the life she had built for herself with such determination. How could she contemplate abandoning all of that for feelings that had developed over mere weeks? Yet when she closed her eyes, it wasn't Boston's refined streets she saw, but the vast Texas sky, the ancient rock paintings, the wildflowers swaying in the canyon. And Bart's face, illuminated by golden light. The next morning, she arrived at Bart's house with a basket of Mrs. Holloway's biscuits and a jar of preserves. The doctor had left, and Bart was sitting up in a chair by the window, looking considerably better than the previous day despite the sling supporting his injured arm. "The doctor says I was lucky," he told her after inviting her in. "The bullet went clean through, missed anything important. I'll be back on duty in a couple of weeks." "I'm glad," Delilah said, setting the basket on a small table. She glanced around the modest house, noting the bookshelves filled with volumes on natural history, Native American culture, and Western exploration alongside well-worn classics. "Your home is lovely." "It's not much," Bart replied, a hint of self-consciousness in his tone, "but it suits me. Please sit." Delilah took the offered chair, suddenly aware of the intimacy of being alone with him in his home. In Boston, such a situation would have been scandalous. Here, it felt natural, almost inevitable. "I've been developing the photographs from Painter's Bluff," she said, reaching into her satchel for a portfolio. "I thought you might like to see them." Bart leaned forward eagerly, his eyes lighting up as she spread the images before him. "These are extraordinary, Delilah. You've captured the essence of the paintings better than I thought possible." She flushed with pleasure at his praise. I was thinking they might form the centerpiece of my article. Ancient Voices of the Frontier or something similar. With your permission, of course. A shadow crossed his face. Are you certain that's wise? I showed you that place in confidence, if too many people learn of its existence. I understand your concerns, she assured him. I wouldn't include the location, just the images themselves and their significance, the story they tell about a different understanding of this land. He studied her face, then nodded slowly. I trust your judgment. And perhaps it's important for more people to see these connections to the past, to understand that this wilderness has been home to people who lived in harmony with it for thousands of years. Their conversation meandered from the photographs to broader topics: the changing nature of the frontier, the encroachment of railroads and Eastern business interests, the disappearing way of life that Bart both criticized for its harshness and mourned for its authenticity. Sometimes I feel caught between worlds, he admitted. I believe in law and progress, in making life safer for decent folks, but I also see what we're losing: a certain freedom, a direct relationship with the land that can't exist in cities. Delilah nodded, understanding completely. That's exactly what I'm trying to capture with my camera, that tension, that moment of transition. As the afternoon light began to fade, Delilah reluctantly gathered her photographs. I should let you rest, she said, rising. Bart caught her hand. Will you come again tomorrow? There's something I'd like to discuss with you. The warmth of his fingers around hers sent a current through her body. Of course, she promised. That evening she wrote in her journal for hours, trying to untangle her thoughts and feelings. When sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with vast horizons and possibilities she had never before considered. Bart was waiting on his small porch when she arrived the next day, dressed in a clean shirt with his arm still in a sling, but his color much improved. I thought we might sit outside, he suggested. The doctor says fresh air is good for healing, and it's a fine day. They settled in the two rocking chairs facing the open prairie beyond his property. For several minutes they sat in comfortable silence, watching a hawk circle lazily overhead. How much longer is your assignment here? Bart asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. 3 more weeks, Delilah replied. Then back to Boston to write the article and prepare the photographs for publication. He nodded, his eyes on the distant horizon. I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about capturing that moment of transition, the changing frontier. He turned to face her. I think you've done that, Delilah, but I wonder if you've noticed something else changing as well. Her heart quickened. What do you mean? I mean us. He said it simply, directly, in that forthright way she had come to expect from him. Whatever this is between us, I'm not a man for flowery words or grand declarations, but I know when something matters, when someone matters. Delilah's throat tightened with emotion. Bart, let me finish, he said gently. I know you have a life waiting for you in Boston, a career you've built against considerable odds. I would never ask you to give that up. What are you asking? She whispered. Nothing yet, he answered with a small smile. Just telling you that, if you were ever to consider a different path, one that might include Fort Worth, or at least Texas, well, you wouldn't be walking it alone. The implication of his words hung in the air between them, both thrilling and terrifying in its possibilities. I've worked so hard to establish myself in Boston, she said finally, to be taken seriously as a photographer, not just a novelty or a woman with an eccentric hobby. I know, Bart acknowledged, and you should be proud of that achievement. I wouldn't expect you to abandon it. He paused, choosing his words carefully. But I wonder if there might be a way to continue that work from here. The frontier is changing, as you've noted. There will be stories to tell, images to capture, for many years to come. The thought had occurred to her as well, in the quiet hours of the night. Harper's might be amenable to a Western correspondent. Or perhaps she could establish her own studio in Fort Worth, document the town's growth as it transformed from frontier outpost to modern city. "It's a lot to consider," she said truthfully. "Of course it is." He reached across the space between their chairs to take her hand. "I'm not asking for an answer today, Delilah, just for you to think about possibilities." She squeezed his fingers. "I will, I promise." In the days that followed, Delilah divided her time between continuing her photographic work and spending hours with Bart as he recovered. They took short walks as his strength returned, his knowledge of the local plants and wildlife expanding her understanding of the landscape she was documenting. One evening, about a week after his injury, they sat on his porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Without preamble, Bart turned to her. "I'm in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since that first day in Wildflower Canyon." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. In Boston, courtships proceeded according to elaborate social rituals, with feelings hinted at rather than plainly stated. But Bart, true to his nature, offered his heart with the same honest clarity with which he approached everything. "I love you too," Delilah replied, surprising herself with how easily the words came. "I wasn't looking for this for you when I came here, but somehow. Sometimes the most valuable discoveries are the ones we weren't searching for," Bart finished for her, his eyes warm in the fading light. He leaned toward her, and this time there was no interruption, no hesitation. His lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but deepened with a passion that left her breathless. When they finally broke apart, Delilah knew with absolute certainty that her life had irrevocably changed course. "I don't want to leave," she whispered against his shoulder as he held her close. "3 weeks won't be enough time." "Then don't leave," he murmured into her hair, "or if you must go, come back to me." The remainder of Delilah's assignment passed in a blur of activity and emotion. By day, she continued her photographic work with renewed purpose, capturing not just the wild landscapes but the human elements of frontier life, families building homes, children playing in dusty streets, women maintaining civilization on the edge of wilderness, men whose faces told stories of hardship and determination. In the evenings, she and Bart planned and dreamed. He accompanied her on shorter expeditions once the doctor cleared him for light duty, his insights enhancing her understanding of what she was seeing, and his presence making even familiar scenes feel new. 2 weeks before her scheduled departure, a telegram arrived from her editor at Harper's Weekly, responding to samples she had sent and the outline of her proposed article. "They love it," she told Bart excitedly, meeting him for dinner at the small restaurant that had become their favorite. "Mr. Phillips says the photographs are revelatory and wants me to expand the series into a 3-part feature." "That's wonderful," Bart said, genuinely pleased for her success. "You deserve the recognition." Delilah took a deep breath. "There's more. I proposed establishing a permanent Western bureau for the publication, based in Fort Worth." Her eyes met his anxiously. "Mr. Phillips is considering it. He wants to discuss details when I return to Boston." Bart's expression transformed from surprise to joy. "You do that?" "Move here permanently, if they agree to my terms, yes." She reached across the table for his hands. "I want both, Bart, my work and a life with you. I think I can have them if I'm brave enough to try." The next morning, Bart arrived at Mrs. Holloway's with his horse saddled and a packed lunch tied to the saddle. "I have something to show you," he announced mysteriously. "Something important." They rode for nearly an hour, heading northwest from town along a creek lined with cottonwoods, until they reached a gentle rise overlooking a small valley. A natural spring bubbled up from the rocks, creating a pool before flowing down to join the creek. Ancient oaks provided shade, and wildflowers dotted the grassy expanse. "It's beautiful," Delilah said as they dismounted. Bart led her to a flat boulder beside the spring. "My grandfather claimed this land when he first came to Texas, built a cabin down by the creek, raised my father here." He gestured toward the valley. "The original house is gone, but the foundation stones are still there. 20 acres of good land with water rights, and those timber stands to the north." Understanding dawned slowly. "This is your land," he nodded. "Has been in my family for 3 generations. I've been saving to build a proper house here someday." His eyes held hers. "I thought you might like to see it, to help plan it if you're amenable." The implication was clear, though he hadn't formally asked the question. "Are you proposing to me, Bartholomew Stone?" Delilah asked, her heart racing. "I suppose I am," he admitted with a smile. "Not very conventionally, I'm afraid." "Nothing about us has been conventional," she reminded him, stepping closer. "And I wouldn't have it any other way." He took her hands in his. "Delilah Norton, I love you more than I thought it possible to love anyone. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, building a life with me here, and showing me the beauty of this world through your eyes as I hope I've shown it to you through mine?" "Yes," she said simply, tears of joy welling in her eyes. "With all my heart, yes." They were married 2 days before Delilah was scheduled to return to Boston, in a small ceremony at the town's church with Mrs. Holloway, Jacob, Sheriff Hayes, and a few other friends in attendance. The bride wore a new blue dress ordered specially from the town's seamstress, and the groom wore his deputy's uniform freshly pressed for the occasion. They departed for Boston the following day, planning to negotiate with Harper's, collect Delilah's belongings, and introduce Bart to her family, before returning to Fort Worth to begin their life together. As the train pulled away from the station, Delilah looked out at the Texas landscape sliding past the window, the vast prairie, the distant mesas, the infinite sky that had become as essential to her as breathing. "Having second thoughts?" Bart asked, noticing her pensive expression. She turned to him with a smile, taking his hand. "Not at all. Just thinking about how I came here to capture the vanishing frontier and instead found something timeless." "And what's that?" he asked, his eyes warm with love. "Home," Delilah answered simply. "I came looking for wilderness and found home instead." 2 years later, Delilah stood on the porch of their newly completed house, her camera capturing the golden light of sunset on the cottonwoods by the creek. The Harper's Western Bureau, consisting primarily of herself and a young assistant, had proven more successful than anyone had anticipated, with her photographic essays on frontier life in demand across the country. Inside, she could hear Bart's deep voice singing a lullaby to their 3-month-old son, Samuel. The sound filled her with a contentment she had never imagined possible during her ambitious years in Boston. She had not abandoned her career, quite the opposite. Her unique perspective as both an outsider and now an insider to frontier life gave her work a depth and authenticity that had earned her national recognition. The previous month, a gallery in New York had hosted an exhibition of her photographs, earning critical acclaim and cementing her reputation as one of America's foremost photographic artists. But her greatest joy came from the life she and Bart had built together, a partnership of equals based on mutual respect, shared passions, and deep love. He had kept his promise to show her the beauty of Texas, taking her to hidden canyons, ancient sacred sites, and secret valleys where wildflowers bloomed in riotous profusion. In turn, she had taught him to see the familiar landscape through new eyes, finding fresh wonders in places he had known all his life. As the last light faded from the sky, Bart joined her on the porch, their sleeping son cradled against his shoulder. "Successful session?" he asked, nodding toward her camera. "Very," she confirmed, leaning against him as they gazed out at the land that had brought them together. "Though I'm beginning to think my most important work isn't the photographs I send to New York." "Oh," he raised an eyebrow questioningly. Delilah smiled, taking their son's tiny hand in hers. "I came to Texas to document a vanishing way of life, to preserve images of the wilderness before it disappeared forever." She looked up at the man she loved, her heart full. "Instead, I found that the real beauty wasn't just in the landscapes, but in building something new, something that honors the past while creating a future. Our future." Bart kissed her gently. "And it's only just beginning." As stars appeared in the velvet Texas sky, Delilah Norton Stone knew with absolute certainty that while she had come west seeking wilderness, what she had found was infinitely more precious: a love and a home that would endure long after the frontier had faded into history.